When you hear the name Martin Luther, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Probably the rebel, right? The guy nailing his 95 Theses to a church door. But that's really only half the story. Today, we're going to look at Luther not as the guy who tore the old church down, but as the master architect who built something totally new in its place, a church designed for everyday people.
Okay, so let's really think about this for a second. It's one thing to stand up and break away from an institution that's been around for 1,000 years. It is a completely different and way harder thing to answer the question, okay, now what? After the protest, after the dust settles, how do you actually build a new church, a new way of believing from scratch? That was the incredible challenge facing Luther.
And Luther's answer was, frankly, revolutionary. He said the real church isn't built out of stone and gold. It's not built by the power of princes and kings. No. He believed it was built from something much, much stronger, the Word of God. But, and this is the key, made so clear and accessible that every single person could understand it for themselves. So, to build this new kind of church of the Spirit, Luther didn't use hammers and nails. He created 4 essential tools, 4 pillars that would basically become the foundation of the Reformation. We're going to walk through each one of them: the People's Bible, the Family Catechism, the New Liturgy, and the Congregational Hymn Book.
All right, let's start with the absolute cornerstone, the Bible itself. You have to remember, for centuries, the Bible was locked away in Latin. It was a language that most people, the vast majority of people, simply couldn't read or understand. So Luther's first and most important job was to break open that lock and give the Bible back to the people in their own language, in German.
And this quote right here, it just perfectly sums up his entire mission. He wasn't just translating words from one language to another. He was translating an entire world. He wanted the text to feel so real, so earthy, so fundamentally German, that it spoke directly to the heart of a farmer or a blacksmith, making these ancient stories feel like they happened just yesterday.
And the work this took, it was just staggering. This was not a quick job. Luther had this incredibly detailed 4-step method. First, he'd make a super literal word-for-word translation. Then he'd brainstorm just a flood of synonyms for every key word. After that, he'd write a totally free version, just trying to capture the vibe, the spirit of the text. And then finally, he'd blend that meticulous, accurate version with the free, poetic one. The result was something both true to the original and incredibly powerful to read.
And get this, he didn't do this locked away in some dusty library. To translate the parts about animal sacrifices, he literally went down to the local butcher shop to learn the right names for all the internal organs of a goat. To describe the precious stones in the Book of Revelation, he had his patron, the Elector of Saxony, lay out the royal jewels for him to inspect. He was a hands-on guy, obsessed with getting the details just right, to make it all feel real.
But his Bible wasn't just words on a page. It had pictures. And these pictures, well, they were seriously powerful propaganda. In the very first edition of his German New Testament, there was this woodcut illustration for the Book of Revelation. It showed the Whore of Babylon, a biblical symbol of ultimate evil, and she was, very clearly and unmistakably, wearing the 3-tiered crown of the Pope. I mean, talk about a direct political attack. Well, as you can imagine, this did not go over well. A rival Catholic ruler, Duke George, went ballistic. He protested so fiercely that for the next edition, the printers had to physically take a chisel to the woodblock carving itself. They actually carved away the top 2 tiers of the crown, turning the papal tiara into a generic, simple little crown, just to calm things down.
But Luther eventually got the last laugh. Years later, in the full Bible edition of 1534, the woodcuts were recarved and yup, the full papal tiara was put right back in. This little story is such a perfect example of how Luther's Bible was at the very center of a huge battle, one fought not just with theology, but with art and raw politics.
Okay, so now the Bible is in German. People can finally read it. But Luther immediately ran into his next big problem. He discovered that religious illiteracy was just everywhere. Most regular people, and shockingly, even a lot of local pastors, had a really weak grasp on the absolute basics of Christianity.
And the teaching materials they had at the time, they were terrible. They were mostly these crude, fear-based pamphlets that basically said, you're a bad person, you deserve to go to hell forever, but you can be forgiven if you obey. And it was that little word, if, that drove Luther crazy. It put all the focus back on what humans had to do, not on what he saw as God's free gift of grace.
So, in 1529, he came up with his solution, and it was brilliant. It's called the Small Catechism.
It was a simple, powerful little handbook designed specifically for parents to teach their kids and their household staff right at home. He broke everything down into 5 simple, memorable points. It was genius.
And the tone, oh man, it was a total 180. Instead of all that fear and condemnation, Luther's catechism is just overflowing with this sense of personal grace and assurance. I mean, just listen to that language. It's not about a transaction, it's about being rescued, being loved. It's beautiful, and it completely changed the way faith was taught.
Okay, so people now have the Bible in their own language, and they have a simple guide to its core teachings. The next logical step for Luther was to tackle the worship service itself. He had to transform the Sunday Mass from this mysterious, distant ritual performed by a priest into a living, breathing, communal experience that everyone could be a part of. And the changes he made were like night and day. His German Mass, introduced in 1526, got rid of Latin and used the language of the people. It shifted the whole focus away from the priest offering a sacrifice for the people to the whole congregation offering thanksgiving together. Those mumbled, inaudible prayers, gone. Every single word was meant to be heard, understood, and learned from. The church service basically became a classroom for the whole community.
And this brings us to the fourth and final tool in Luther's toolbox. And honestly, this might have been the most revolutionary one of all. Luther knew that if you really want to build a church of the people, you have to give the people a voice, and he did that through the power of music.
Luther's love for music was just profound. You can see it in this quote. For him, music wasn't just some nice background noise. He saw it as a divine gift from God, second only to theology itself and its power to lift the human spirit, to fight off despair, and to fill people with joy.
And his musical reforms were sweeping. He didn't just write a couple of songs. He rewrote the old priestly chants to make them clear. He encouraged the use of beautiful, complex choir music. But most importantly, and this was the real game changer, he pretty much invented the idea of the whole congregation singing together. He took parts of the service and turned them into powerful hymns that everybody could sing.
And the effect was instantaneous. It was explosive. These hymns had strong melodies, powerful words, and they spread like wildfire. They were so good at convincing people to join the Reformation that one of Luther's fiercest Catholic opponents, a Jesuit, famously complained that Luther's hymns had killed more souls than his sermons. Now that's a review.
And this wasn't just some abstract theological debate. This was happening on the streets. There's this amazing story from the town of Magdeburg, where an old weaver was arrested just for selling and singing Luther's hymns on a street corner. Think about that. He wasn't a priest or a scholar, but his song connected with people so deeply that 200 citizens spontaneously formed a crowd and demanded his release. Music was turning the Reformation into a true grassroots movement. So in the end, you see how it all fits together. These 4 tools, the accessible Bible, the family catechism, the understandable liturgy, and the powerful congregational hymn book, they became the living architecture of a brand new kind of faith. It wasn't a church built of stone and mortar. It was a community built on a foundation of shared words, shared knowledge, and shared songs.
And that really leaves us with one big final thought. Luther's entire project, when you boil it down, was about empowerment through understanding. It makes you wonder not just about religion, but about any complex field of knowledge. What happens when you take powerful, guarded ideas and make them truly accessible to everyone? How does that one simple act completely change the world?